Good evening, everyone. A quick bit of housekeeping before we start. We do have translation services this evening, and so in order for that to properly work, if you can please, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and apologize, I know some of you are here viewing our webcast and aren't here on the Zoom platform, but for those of you on the Zoom platform, at the bottom, if you can select interpretation and either select English or Spanish. Buenas tardes. Antes que empezamos, por favor, si al abajo en tu screen puedes selectar tu idioma preferido para la traducción esta noche. Y puedes selectar a donde se dice interpretación, inglés o español. Gracias. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joaquin Escobello. I'm chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Wednesday, July 7th. It is 4 p.m. and I would like to bring us all back here to order. I'll start first by introducing my fellow board colleagues and staff. Here today with me is Vice Chair Doreen Diadamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. With us today is also our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, our Chief Counsel, or actually, our Chief Counsel is not with us today, and instead we have David Rose. And additionally, we have our Clerk of the Board, Janine Townsend, and assisting her is Courtney Tyler and Margie Argel. As you can see, today's workshop is being webcast and recorded. And so if you are not here on the Zoom platform with us now, and instead you're viewing us through our YouTube Live platform or the Cali PA website, and though you intend to comment on today's workshop item, you need to either follow the directions that are at the top of today's notice and agenda in order to get a invitation here to the Zoom platform and a password. If you are having trouble with that, you can email directly our clerk of the board at commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help you get onto the platform here. Until it is your turn to speak, you will be muted and your video will be off. And please do state your name clearly and any affiliation you may have. And with that, I think we can get on to the main event. I just want to start by and quickly transition here to our incredible staff that have pulled together a resolution here these last months, really, again, kind of clocking back to certainly a lot of work that the Waterboards has done prior to our direction last August to staff to develop a racial equity resolution. And more importantly, though, to begin listening sessions, both internally and externally, to first ensure that we were basing whatever resolution or action that this board was going to take to address and advance racial equity, do so in a way that is reflective of our own community here at the Waterboards, but importantly, the needs and reflections and input of communities throughout California. So I just want to thank what has been an incredible effort to get us to this moment, to have a draft resolution, to hold here a workshop, and have such a work product that is not just thorough, but builds the case for board action around racial equity in such a way that I've just never seen pulled together, and incredibly proud of the work product that we have here to contemplate today together. So with that, I won't belabor any further thought here, but kick it over to our Eileen Sobek, our Executive Director, who has led, along with an incredible team, again, who you'll hear from directly today and hear about this effort. So Ms. Sobek.
Thank you so much, Chair Escobello and board members. And I'm really happy to be here today with a robust representative portion of the folks that have been helping us through the journey of the last year, and really excited about the number of people who are participating in this workshop. And even if they aren't able to be on the workshop with us today, hopefully they will be able to watch it online or give us written comments, because we do want to be, this is the kind of effort where inclusivity is key, totally key. So I'm just going to review, go over some of the things in slightly more detail than you did, Chair Escobello, but just sort of to set the stage to remind the board sort of how we got to where we are today. And for those who maybe haven't been part of the whole journey with us, just to set the stage. And then we're going to have quite a robust presentation from two representatives from both the working group and the steering committee that have led most of the work that's been going on the last year. So, you know, I think that this last May, I think we all remarked on the fact that it was the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder, and that death really did spark a movement across the world, across the nation, and here in California. And I think that it led people all over the state and the nation to speak out against racial inequity and especially inequities that have systematically impacted people of color and Black people in particular. And this led to a lot of very difficult conversations in our culture, in our society, and including those here at the Waterboards. And we heard calls from members of the community and from our own staff saying that we also have participated either knowledgeably or without our knowledge in systemic racism, and that our actions have had impacts both on the communities in which we work and on the people in our workforce. It really crystallized the need for the Waterboards to step up and to step up our efforts to address racial equity in a more robust way. I think that we have been trying to look at environmental justice and getting to a more diverse workforce, but to say that that was a priority or something that we were addressing in a very systematic way, I think would have been an overstatement. So we had not done nothing. We had laid some groundwork, but I think the events of 2020 really crystallized the fact that we all really wanted to see a more robust effort. And the board really responded in its August 2020 board meeting, acknowledging the historic effects of institutional racism that must be confronted throughout government, including here at the Waterboards, and directed staff to develop a priority plan of action. So as a key component of that priority plan of action is this draft resolution that we put out recently for public comment and are bringing here and seeking input on today. And it really is to provide more direction for the course of our racial equity work. I think actually just the preparation for this resolution has resulted in quite a deep dive into what is the history of racial inequity that affects our work and our workforce. Where do we want to go? How do we want to go there? We did, as you pointed out so rightly, we did a lot of listening. We had a lot of very tough conversations, both internal and external conversations. I think that is part of what has held this work back. It is a very sensitive subject. It is extremely personal to those who have suffered injustice and inequity, and it's very personal to others who haven't been as sensitized to it and are feeling accused and threatened as well. But we're never going to get to any solutions if we don't actually confront the problem and have these conversations. And I'm really proud of our staff and our communities for investing, even when it has been painful and even when from time to time we've made a misstep. Nevertheless, we are, I did want to say a couple more things. One is that the draft resolution, it is not an endpoint, it is a milestone. We will be working, one of the things that it's directing us to do is to come up with a more detailed work plan. I think we all obviously knew that that was going to be required and would be coming. But as you say, it really is to lay out how we got here and what some of our end goals are, and then we will be able to come up with a work plan, which will set out some more milestones and some calls to action, some actual actions to for us in our journey. I just wanted to say one other thing which is, you are absolutely right. This has been a fabulous team. We've heard voices from outside, from our communities, from the stakeholder groups that we work with, from communities that we don't work with as often as we need to, and we want to continue those efforts. We have taken advantage of some outside facilitators and some outside experts from both inside and outside government, because there are people who have spent a lot of time thinking and working in this world of racial equity. So we are willing to and want to learn from those who are experts. But we have also drawn on the experience and the knowledge and the humility of our own staff. And I think one thing that is pretty unique is that we pulled together a group that included top leadership and some of our greenest, most recently hired employees. And we've really brought in quite a variety of viewpoints. And I think that that is really necessary if what we're going to do is change the culture of both our work and our workforce. So with that, I will turn it over to racial equity team member Brittany Evans, who's going to start us out explaining sort of what we did, how we did it, and where we ended up. And we have multiple members of the team who are going to be available to answer specific questions or talk about more specific aspects of the initiative, or answer questions that board members or members of the public might have. So I will now turn it over to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. I almost cried when you said board member Nicole Morgan. I mean, thank you to all the board, but Nicole used to be my superior in DFA, so just holds a really special spot in my heart. So, but thank you, everybody, for having me here at the public listening session. I'm Brittany Evans, and I am an AGPA in DFA here at the Waterboards. So thank you for coming to our presentation today, our public workshop, so we could explain a little more about what we've been doing. Next slide, please. Why are we here? So in 2016, the State Water Board adopted the human right to water. Human right to water recognizes that every human being has the right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible drinking water. In 2018, the Water Board employees began working with Government Alliance on Racial Equity, also known as GARE, and participating in the Cal EPA Advancing Racial Equity team. In 2020, the Water Board established a racial equity initiative in response to events that shed light on the need for accelerated change. And Eileen already spoke to some of those things, so we won't go back over all of them. But what we would like to do is acknowledge the board for their work in directing the racial equity initiative to be formed. They asked on August 18th in 2020 that at a public meeting directly addressing the topic of racial inequity and the presence of institutional racism embedded within the fabric of the U.S. government, including here in the Water Boards. The board acknowledged the history and effects of institutional racism and committed to dismantling within the organization by directing staff to develop a resolution and a priority plan of action. So that is what we are working towards now. The resolution that we're going to be talking about today, a lot of work has gone into that. So we do want to also acknowledge the racial equity team and the working group, as well as the steering committee, for the hard work that they've been doing with the racial equity in Water Boards over the past few months, over the past year. It's required a substantial amount of time and commitment and a lot of emotional stamina for everybody involved. So we want to thank each one of you for all of your work that you're doing and helping advance the Water Boards towards our goals. Despite the challenges, it's been a very rewarding experience, I think, on all of our parts to be able to see some of the changes that are taking place and that we're actually paving the way for future Water Board employees and board members as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going into the purpose a little bit more, but this is to talk about To provide an overview for the draft of the resolution to the State Water Board members, staff, and members of the public, I just kind of said that, but in order to ensure equitable representation of history, the Water Board's core values, the working group, the steering committee, we've spent a lot of hours compelling research, drafting, and editing the resolution that you're going to see here today that we're going to discuss and comment on. So we're hoping to get your feedback at the end in the form of questions. Make sure that you follow the directions in order to provide that feedback for the resolution. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little bit of background, and that's how we're going to lead into the actual draft resolution, and then we'll go for comments from the board and stuff. Rebecca's going to help you with the draft resolution part. I'm going to talk about the background. Next slide, please. Okay. So first, we're going to go over a few definitions. Next slide, please. In order to better understand racial equity, we have to understand how structural, institutional, interpersonal, and individual racism are all intertwined. So if you look at this slide, you can see the definitions and how they all tie into it as individual. Institutional is policies, practices, and procedures, and it leads all the way down to individual, which is prejudgment and bias, whether you want to or not, it happens in just about everybody. So these things all tie into one another and how we've been brought up to think in our society and our workplace. Next slide, please. There are different layers of racism, and here at the Waterboards, more specifically, we're working on institutional and structural racism, the things that impact our families, our employees, our communities that we serve. A very, very important place to start is what is racial equity? Racial equity means the end of disparities based on race, such as outcomes are improved for all. Race, income, wealth are closely connected in the United States. Inequities are not just about income. And when we hold income constant, there are still large inequities based on race across multiple indicators for success, including environment, education, jobs, incarceration, health, and housing. Gare defines racial equity as when race can no longer be used as to predict outcomes for all groups until all groups are improved. Equality and equity are very different things, even though they're used interchangeably. Equity is about fairness, while equality is about sameness. So in this slide here, we just have an image because there's often a misconception of equality versus equity. Equality is when everybody starts off on the same level and is given the same tools and is supposed to achieve the same things. Equity is the understanding that not everybody starts out in the same place. Everybody has different life circumstances that they start off with, or they have different factors that may influence a goal that they're trying to reach. So when we say equity here at the Waterboards, we're meaning we want to give every individual person the things that they need in order to achieve the goals that we're working towards here in Waterboards. Next slide, please. This here is a map of Oakland. This is called, this is a Bay Area map it was created in the 1930s by federally funded Homeowners Loan Corporation. It provides one example of institutional racism. This map, if you see the color coding on the map, indicates what they believe the risk for insuring home loans in specific neighborhoods. Green means the best, white means professional residents, blue describes areas, or desirable areas, I'm sorry. Blue is desirable areas, while yellow is seen as definitely declining, and red areas are deemed hazardous. In areas that were automatically assigned a red rating if Black residents lived in that neighborhood, and the HOLC refused to insure home loans to these areas. So this was redlining, and this was done years ago in the 1930s. And sadly, we have learned that it is still the number one predictor of associated with environmental conditions. Next slide, please. Okay, race is the number one predictor, and access of clean water. So we may ask, how does this affect the water board? And this is exactly how it affects the water board. When we advance racial equity within communities we serve, we have historically underserved by evaluating and modifying our programs, policies, and processes. So historically, red line neighborhoods are associated with the worst environmental conditions and greater population vulnerability to the effects of pollution today. Next slide, please. So inequality within the water boards. We would like to acknowledge that there are inequalities here within the water boards. We would like to acknowledge that our demographics do not reflect that of the state of California. The water board's workforce and leadership do not reflect the overall demographics for the state of California. Next slide, please. So here is a graph, and the data source is the state population data for 2019 and workforce data from 2020 for the Cal HR 5102 report. Here, as you see, compared to California with a 43% population of white, we have a 56% population of white employees within the water boards. We have a 42% population of Black, Indigenous, people of color, which is what that stands for, and a 63% of BIPOC in the state of California. So as you can see, that's quite a significant difference. Next slide, please. This is for supervisors within the water boards. So when we look at executive management and positions and supervisory positions, there's an even bigger gap. This again is the Cal HR 5102 report. And one of the things I would, that reflect inequalities is the need for racial inequality, racial equity within the water boards is, I'm sorry, give me one second. Sorry, I copy and pasted the wrong notes, I apologize. Okay, so the white population within management at water boards is at 68% versus the California population of 38%. And as you see, the rest of the people of color and the water boards and supervisory positions is very, very low. Next slide, please. So I'm going to close by saying there was an email that was sent out in April of this year. And when that email was sent out, there were a lot of responses to that email of varying degrees. I was the one that sent the email, and I received even more emails that weren't replied all. And the need in the water boards to address these things now became even greater. I'm sorry, give me a second. So the all staff employee support lunch email back in April 2021, there was a working group that developed a subgroup of volunteers that during a time of sadness and disappointment amongst the Black community of almost 2 weeks of straight deaths and assaults and injustices in various areas all over the country, and the anticipated rendering of the Derek Chauvin verdict that week, a lot of our people of color employees were not okay. So we decided to host an employee support lunch for those who felt like they needed a sense of support in the workplace. I'm sorry, y'all. It was sent out all staff and not BCC'd by mistake. There was a number of replies as a response to the invite. It expressed a variety of viewpoints, which we all respect, but some of which highlighted the need for further education in the water boards on racial equity, which is one of the core goals in the draft resolution that we're presenting to you today. It relayed to the racial equity group that not only do we have a range of opinions in regards to racial equity, but there is also a lack of awareness and exactly what racial equity is. So that's what we're working to do in these groups. We need to know what it means to experience it in the workplace. We need to know what it means to experience it in the country, because it happens. Your employees, Black, Indigenous, people of color, wake up every day Black. They don't have a choice. So to have the choice as to whether or not we deal with this today is something we need to think about. So I'm gonna leave you by saying, if not today, then when? If not here at this meeting when we're discussing why we did the resolution and why we want racial equity within the workforce, then when? With that, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. Thank you so much for your time. I am so sorry.
You have nothing to be sorry about. Thank you so much, Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Good afternoon, board members and chair. My name is Rebecca Asami, and I'm an engineering geologist in Region 5. I'm also a member of the Racial Equity Working Group. For my portion of the presentation, I'm going to discuss the draft racial equity resolution, starting with the resolution development process. Next slide, please. Research conducted for the draft resolution consisted of 3 general steps. Those steps included conducting foundational research and reaching out to our colleagues and the public. This research gave the racial equity team, which includes the working group and steering committee, a big picture in terms of what the range of experiences have been for folks working and interacting with the water boards. Examples of sources used for foundational research are shown on this slide. Racial equity team members reviewed historical laws and practices that have inequitable impacts on communities of color. We also looked into things that our agency has been directly involved in. For example, historical beneficial uses of water, water rights, and workforce demographics. Next slide. Thanks. So the racial equity team felt we couldn't write this resolution without doing some important face-to-face kind of research. As such, one of the first events hosted by the racial equity team were the public listening sessions. In November and December 2020, the team held 4 sessions, 3 in English and 1 in Spanish. There were 86 total participants, which included stakeholders, water professionals, environmental justice advocates, students, and members of the tribal community. These sessions consisted of large group discussions and small breakouts facilitated by Waterboard staff. Discussion topics included water in your community, decision-making and public participation, improving accessibility, funding, and workforce capacity building. Some key takeaways from the sessions included DACs, or disadvantaged communities, tend to be concerned about adverse health outcomes related to their water. Some participants stated that they feel that regulators cater to industrial users, and some participants stated that communities of color feel excluded from decision-making processes that ultimately affect them. Next slide, please. In addition to the public listening sessions, we held 9 listening sessions for staff only in March of this year. These sessions were the first organization-wide internal conversation on race. The sessions were facilitated by a third-party consultant with experience working in racial equity. We chose to use a consultant because we understand that this topic may fall outside of some folks' comfort zones, and we wanted to ensure participants would be able to freely share. We had more than 350 Waterboard staff join us, and they were a mix of folks from all of our boards, divisions, and offices. During the sessions, some participants stated that they felt that there is a lack of diversity in some of our offices, and this makes the climate feel less inclusive, especially for employees of color. And we heard there is a need for more communication and education about our racial equity efforts, including how they relate to the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the racial equity team worked very hard to do research prior to drafting the resolution and to ensure that there were opportunities for folks to provide feedback. But we want to continue to get feedback. We want the conversation to keep going. To that end, the racial equity team has set up some lines of communication for staff and the public. Some of these include hosting our staff support lunches, which are facilitated by members of the racial equity team. And we have our newly up and running website, which details a lot of the work summarized in this presentation. We also have an email address specific to this effort that folks can use to get in contact with the team directly. The email and webpage will be provided at the end of this presentation. We are accepting comments from staff and the public on the draft racial equity resolution. If you have feedback to share, we want to hear from you. And finally, importantly, I want to note that the Waterboards have been involved in racial equity work for a while now, before the racial equity team was convened. For example, the Office of Public Participation has included their work via outreach for some time. Now that I have talked about the resolution development process, I'm going to discuss elements of the draft resolution. When drafting the resolution, there were three general goals that the team tried to keep in mind. The first goal is to acknowledge and condemn systemic racism and the impacts it has on the communities we serve. Second, the resolution serves to institutionalize racial equity as a priority at the Waterboards. And finally, the resolution directs staff to act. Next slide. As stated in the last slide, the first general goal of the resolution is to acknowledge and condemn racism. This includes acknowledging the existence of systemic and institutional racism and the parts of our history which have been intentionally harmful to Indigenous people, Black people, and other people of color. As a result of systemic racism, a person's race can be a predictor to things like access to clean water, whether or not a person may face adverse environmental impacts in their lifetime, or whether or not a person may have easy access to certain basic services. As a team, we acknowledge and condemn racism because remaining silent perpetuates inequities and systems of oppression. Next slide. The second general goal of the resolution is to institutionalize racial equity as a priority at the Waterboards. Going forward, the overarching goal for this effort regarding the communities we serve and have historically underserved is to advance racial equity by evaluating and modifying our programs, policies, and processes. The big picture goal for this effort in terms of our workforce is we want to help create an equitable, diverse, and inclusive workplace where all employees feel they belong and where professional opportunities and outcomes are not predicted by race. Next slide. Finally, the resolution directs staff to act. The resolution is meant to be a milestone of this work, not the final act of the Racial Equity Initiative. The Racial Equity directs staff to develop a proposal for creating an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, create and implement a Racial Equity Action Plan, and calls on the 9 regional boards to adopt a similar resolution. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, the resolution directs staff to create a Racial Equity Action Plan. This action plan, once drafted, will outline steps to normalize conversations about racial equity, foster a workplace that integrates racial equity work into our work, and effectively engage with communities of color to best benefit all that we serve. The racial equity team feels the action plan must be developed within 1 year of adoption of the resolution. It must be metric-driven, and it should incorporate all of our divisions, offices, and programs. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes our timeline. As mentioned previously, we are still in public comment period, which will close in just a few days. Comments will be reviewed and incorporated as appropriate into the resolution through mid-August. And lastly, it's the hope of the team that the board considers a final draft of the resolution for adoption during its meeting on August 17th. Next slide, please. For those interested in submitting comments, we have a few ways for you to do that. You may send an email to commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov. Please include in the subject line, comment letter, racial equity resolution. You can also comment by fax, by postmail, or if you prefer, you may hand deliver your comments to our clerk at our office in downtown Sacramento. Keep in mind, once again, comments must be received by noon on Monday, July 12th. Next slide, please. If you have not received a copy of the draft resolution and you would like to, the draft racial equity resolution is posted on the State Water Board's website at www.waterboards.ca.gov/racial_equity. All of the contact information shared on the last slide can also be found on this webpage. To request a copy of the draft proposed racial equity resolution, you may also send an email to racialequity@waterboards.ca.gov. You can also use this email if you have any general questions about the Racial Equity Initiative. Next slide. That brings us to the end. Thank you, board members, and thank you, Chair, for all of your time and continued support in this effort. I also want to thank the racial equity team, especially those that helped put this workshop together. There are a few of the racial equity team members on today, and we can take time now to answer questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I just really appreciate, again, the incredible work that has gone on here on the resolution, and just acknowledge that these are not easy conversations. They are difficult for all of us, let alone government institutions. And so we come to this work knowing that it is a side of our work that and expertise that is different. It is so much more the human element, but it is so critical to the discussions and challenges that we face in our communities, in the state, in our nation, when we talk about the disparities that we find and the challenges that we have to things like access to clean water and the fact that 1 million Californians don't have it. And so I just really appreciate the great care and attention that's gone into the resolution. We have about 20 some odd individuals here, 21 at this point, 20 to speak. And so really looking forward to listening, continue to listen in this space to their comments there and reflect here further then. But I don't think I have too much more to add, except for my thanks and acknowledgement that these are not easy conversations. And so it requires all of us to provide ourselves the space to have them, though, and acknowledge their difficulty. And so just thank you. Fellow board colleagues, please, some initial thoughts or questions here. And then we can, and then if not, we can certainly get to what are a number of commenters. Thanks.
I just have a question for the team. I want to listen to comments before making any comments, but just a question following up on the presentations. One of the slides I think went through a lot of foundational research that the team undertook, and I'm wondering if that is something that we have the ability to share, or if it's already up somewhere, or if there's plans on sharing or making some of that accessible, because that's a huge amount of work.
I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to that. I don't think we have it up at the moment. I don't think we have it, cataloged and curated, but I think that could be an element of our work plan to kind of create that and to capture, because there was a lot of good work, including resolutions and approaches that other agencies and entities have taken, but also kind of all the historical background. So we'll be happy to look into that and have that be an element of the work plan. That might be the best place for it.
Yeah, I think Stefan may have some thoughts. So Stefan, by all means. Mr. Kahina.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think, we all recognize the value of the research that was put into this. And, to be honest with you, there's a big, long Word document right now that has a lot of research and a lot of links. And so there has been some discussion in the team about how, where best to take that. And I think some of it is certainly going to feed the action plan, but there could be other things too. We've talked about story maps or, just some other way to make use of all that and make it accessible. So that's part of the medium term work, but it is certainly something that we've looked at, and we do not want to, we want to make the best use we can of all of that research.
Great. Thank you so much, Stefan. And thank you, Board Member Firestone. Any other questions or comments or thoughts here at the top? Okay. Hearing none, we can begin to go to our commenters. And our first, and glad to call up here, Chief Colleen Sisk from the Winnemem-Wintu tribe.
Chair Escobello, I do believe he is not on the Zoom platform at this time.
She is not, I think, currently. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Janine. And Chief Sisk, if you are viewing through the platform and need assistance getting onto the Zoom platform or otherwise, you can email our clerk of the board. So thank you. And so then we'll go next to Danny Merkley.
I really don't have any comments at this time. I do recognize what a difficult task this is, what a monumental task it is, just based on the conversations I have with my friends and colleagues and family over time. But at this point, I don't have any comments or questions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you as well, Mr. Merkley. Really appreciate your participation and support here in all this. Miss Williams, I see you have your hands up. By all means, if you would like to go now, you can, and then I will call Gracie Torres afterwards. So I'll call up LaDonna Williams here, and it should be asking you to unmute. There you are.
Okay, can you hear me at this point?
We can.
Oh, okay, and I apologize if I'm coming in at the wrong time. Your process wasn't that easy. I thought we had a Zoom or a Zoom link, and it took you to all these other links that wasn't a Zoom link. So we had to sit and sort of watch this process live webcam, and then we had to fill out the app or whatever, and then finally get this link. So in between that, I missed some of the comments that was made, but the person that I guess has been your facilitator that was brought to tears with the experiences that she's had, what was her name?
Brittany. And she's one of our staff. She's part of our effort here. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I just want to say, really appreciate her comments, her heartfelt comments explaining what the experiences have been. And I'm really hoping that the Waterboards takes this to heart. You know, as we know, previous years, we participated in the symposium that raised these environmental justice issues, particularly being more inclusive and recognizing the need for the Waterboards to address environmental justice more than just on paper, because our communities are literally sick and dying. And when we have reached out to the Waterboards to address issues, for instance, vapor intrusion and issues that are directly impacting our communities from old facilities, we're told that unless we get a large group of people to address this issue, they can't be bothered. And that is, those were the words we were told by the supervisor that is supposed to be in charge of community outreach. And when we went to GeoTracker or Cow and Viral Screen, we seen in our communities, R meaning frontline disadvantaged communities that have had pretty much no communication with the water boards. That has been your continual practice. And I see not only is it that practice with communities, but obviously with your employees as well, where people of color, and you lump us all together, which we shouldn't be, because we know our experiences aren't the same. We should not be all lumped together as just those environmental justice people or those people of color. I know in the Black community, our numbers are through the roof when it comes to environmental injustices and inequities. We should not be lumped in the same with other special groups that are treated in a way that are not really inclusive as well, but they still get more support and more funding than the Black community. And so when I look at the documents that you guys have, yes, you made an attempt, but you used an agency like GARE. Where was the input from frontline environmental justice impacted communities like ours in Vallejo, San Francisco, Richmond, East and West Oakland? Where were those voices or communities being invited into the decision-making table with you all to come up with these ideas that you did? Now, I do know for a fact, I raised the issue with doing the resolutions. I only heard you guys give each other credit within the agency to come up with this. Communities pushed hard to get this language put into the boards and for you guys to pay attention to this. So where does the agency realize that they really have to be more than just on paper when it comes to real equity, real inclusion, anti-racism, or to eradicate racism? Where are we really going to start those real conversations that are inclusive with our voices with you at the table? Not talking to us and presenting us with these documents after you all got together and did it. You needed to do it with us. And we started the process, but the finishing product was community was left out of the process. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Ms. Williams. I apologize you feel that way, especially because I felt we were pretty intentional this last year in doing that outreach and listening to communities, and that this resolution in its intention and its drafting is certainly supposed to be reflective of listening. It's why it took us a year to get to where we are. But I appreciate and I hear you, and commit to continuing to do better in this space. And as we said, this resolution isn't an ending point at all for our work, but we'll continue to guide it. And so thank you. I appreciate your comments today. Next, I think we have up Gracie Torres.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Chair and board, my name is Gracie Torres and I serve on the board of directors of Western Municipal Water District here in the Inland Empire. I want to begin with just telling you a little bit about my story and what it's like to be alone in the water world. I've been in the water industry for a decade now. I began at Cal State San Bernardino, where I sampled water at Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore in order to fix an turbidity problem. But during my studies there, we traveled to the Coachella Valley, which I know the chair is familiar with, and we tried to create a filter to clean the water for the migrant families that were there. And I remember we found this what's called Foslock. We're all in the water world, so it's called Foslock, and you just put it in fish tanks, and it usually takes the arsenic out of water. And I remember thinking, just across the valley in Palm Springs, there are fish tanks that have cleaner and better water than there in the Coachella Valley. And that's where my passion for water began. Shortly after, I began working at Riverside County Flood Control, where now I manage stormwater permits, but I did everything from wait in the middle of the night for a storm to come and sample water and hopefully get it tested and see that it was doing well. And of course, what we've seen is that areas that are disproportionately funded and taken care of have the worst water quality. Now, as you can see, I manage the stormwater permit for the Whitewater River, and I'm passionate about these areas that are generally forgotten. That led me to running for office, and I was successful, and now I serve on a water board but it's lonely. I've gone to meetings like Aqua or other meetings, CASA, where I'm supposed to be surrounded by my colleagues, but I can tell you that it's very lonely. As the first Latina on my board, one of the first Latinas that was elected in Riverside County, or was elected, not the first, but only at the time. It's very lonely in the water world to look around and nobody understands when I'm screaming from the rooftops saying, hey, there are a million people without water. Why is everyone smiling? We shouldn't be this happy. And that also led me to starting a nonprofit here in the Inland Empire with my colleague Channing, who's also lonely on his board, and that aims to create equitable pathways to water and wastewater careers. So when I saw this resolution, I said, this is the first step. If this resolution means that the employees at the state water board feel heard, feel that we're moving towards equity, then there's nothing stopping us from moving down to the regional boards and to ultimately water boards, and hopefully in water careers, so that when my children, if any of them decide to love and be passionate about water like I am, they don't have to feel lonely. There are a couple of things that I want to suggest. Although this resolution is beautiful and it's inclusive of things that I never expected to see in a resolution, as the chairman said, I never expected to see words like white supremacy, indigenous people, Black, BIPOC, spelling out BIPOC. I never expected to see that, and it's a beautiful resolution. I do applaud the racial equity team for their hard work. And I also share my sentiments with Brittany. This must have been difficult, but girl, you did it, and look where it's taken you. So thank you so much for being candid and being open in your workplace, where many of us don't feel like we're able to do. I would urge that there is a budget component. As we know, Martin Luther King said, your budget is a reflection of your values. So unless you have a component that will bring the budget to a halt and say this is a priority, a resolution is just, as the lady said before me, just a paper. You need to include in your budgets, especially if you're moving that to the regional boards, that will look back and go to their permittees, and they're all going to say, where is the money for this, right? I know one of the biggest problems with regulations that come down are the unfunded mandates. And so if we're serious, we want to include a budget component. And the next thing is creation of a environmental justice committee at the state level, at the regional board level. And there should be no permit or no regulation adopted without the EJ community's input. So because I know this very well, I know that there are, in Southern California, there are many permits that are being written right now. And there is no requirement that they sit down with the EJ community or EJ advocates so that they are heard. And so those are the only things that I would say that if you included, it would come full circle, and this can be a reality. Again, I thank the board for taking the step. I thank the racial equity team for I'm sure these conversations were not easy. As a woman of color who has tried to open these conversations in an area where it's still unwelcomed, I know that's difficult. And so I applaud you. Thank you. I'm happy to see, and I'm happy to hear that one day it won't be as lonely for us in the water world, and we'll be able to look at each other and say, we're here to provide water, provide clean, equitable water and beneficial uses to everyone, starting hopefully with the 1 million people that don't have access to it now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Torres, for your personal story and for the good cogent recommendations. Really appreciate your feedback and contributions today. Thank you. Next, we have Lashi Rodriguez.
Chair Escobello, I do believe that she is not on the
Okay.
platform.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Townsend. Then next we have Natalie Escobello Garcia. And Ms. Garcia should be invited here to unmute and share your camera if you'd like.
I did ask her to share and she actually went off the platform, but she's back on, so let me bring her back in.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
We can now.
Oh, so
Hi,
sorry
Natalie.
about
Oh,
I
it's
was
okay.
having some technical difficulties.
No worry in the least.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie. I'm a policy coordinator with Leadership Council that works in the Coachella Valley. On behalf of our organization, we commend the board in taking steps to ensure racial equity at the board and in their work, and offer the following suggestions to further assist these efforts. First, while it is important to acknowledge the overall racial inequities that plague the state and the country, the board must also acknowledge its direct role in perpetuating inequitable water allocation and management practices in California. Intentional choices are made every day in where water quality data is collected, to how water rights are managed, where the state water and Central Valley project contracts have been permitted, etc. These intentional choices have had disparate impacts on BIPOC communities. Until this history is acknowledged, we run the risk of repeating past mistakes. We thank the board for its commitment to uphold the human right to water, specifically for BIPOC communities, but the board must also affirm a commitment to protect the drinking water of BIPOC communities for future generations. Often we find that inequity can run far more rampant at the local level. To the extent possible, the board should require all 9 regional boards to adopt this resolution. And last, given the importance of this resolution, we believe a longer comment period, even just an additional week, would help include additional feedback. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Ms. Garcia. Really appreciate the good recommendations. Thank you. Next, we have Chelsea Haynes.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Okay, yeah.
We can. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to share comments today on the draft racial equity resolution. My name is Chelsea Haynes. I'm the Regulatory Relations Manager with the Association of California Water Agencies, ACWA. ACWA represents over 460 public water agencies that deliver water for residential, commercial, and agricultural purposes. I just wanted to share my support today for the State Water Board's focus on achieving racial equity. Last year, ACWA's Board of Directors recognized the need for more diversity in the water industry when we developed our 5-year strategic plan, which includes the goal of promoting a diverse and inclusive environment across our organization and the industry. So ACWA and our members look forward to collaborating with the State Water Board to realize this vitally important role. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Really appreciate the contributions and for participating today, Ms. Haynes. Really appreciate ACWA's input on this. Thank you. Next, we have Conrad Fisher. Mr. Fisher.
Hi, my name is Conrad Fisher with Water Climate Trust, and I just wanted to thank the board and the staff for this historic moment and resolution, and also thank the Black Lives Matter movement for the last year, because I don't think it would happen without that. So by way of additional introduction, most of my adult life I've focused on advocacy for the human right to water and water for ecosystems and river dependent communities. It seems from the resolution, the first, human right to water, is addressed quite thoroughly. However, the second, water for ecosystems, is not adequately addressed. During several water board meetings this year, we all heard from tribal members throughout California about the importance of leaving enough water in rivers and streams for fish and other in-stream needs. We heard from tribal youth throughout California and adults that leaving water in stream is critical to food security, economic security, health, and culture. So I'm hoping today for improved solidarity between human right to water and water for nature advocates. I think these two goals can support each other. And given the testimony of the last 3 months to the water board from tribal members, it should be clear to all of us by now that in-stream flows are a racial equity issue. It should be clear now, but it's not in the resolution to the extent it should be. It's addressed, but it's not in there. One way to put it in there under the whereas section It was amazing to see this historical seizure of land addressed. I would suggest immediately after that, talk about the historical seizure of water by non-native people, which started when the first gold miners came to California and continues to this day. I, myself, am a non-native water right holder, which gives me the right to do things I should not have the right to do. Water rights have been established for out-of-stream uses without reserving rights for in-stream beneficial uses and users, including indigenous people. This happens not just where land has been stolen by non-native people, but also where land hasn't been stolen, where native people are still on their land. The water that flows through is being stolen. And to this day, water board policies and practices maintain this racially unjust water rights system. And I'm hoping that given what we're all talking about today, we can start to change that. Again, water board policies maintain this racially unjust system. And a prime example is that despite strong laws protecting water for rivers, strong laws protecting in-stream beneficial uses, the water board has not established in-stream flow requirements or reserved in-stream water rights on most California streams and rivers. This was a discussion last week. I think a few of you were there, but that was a discussion last week regarding the Scott and Shasta rivers. And still we're talking about delaying. And I'm almost there in the therefore be it resolved section. I would suggest an additional affirms the water board's commitment to protecting in-stream beneficial uses and users of water for river dependent communities, including indigenous people. And then finally, the racial equity action plan. I'm glad there's going to be another plan, but I think it's important to recognize all of the existing plans that also need to be finished that will accomplish the outcomes, if not the stated objective of the racial equity plan. For example, the California Water Action Plan. If the water board were to accomplish the in-stream flow objectives in there, that would do a lot towards racial equity. The in-stream flow provisions in SIGMA, the PR Public Resources Code 10,000, there are plenty of laws, programs, and plans which, if the water board properly implemented them, would accomplish racial justice objectives. So for more information on this, I would encourage you to go to the water board meeting of last week or the previous month or the previous 3 months. There's been a bunch of amazing testimony from tribal activists from throughout California. And in closing, I just would call on all the advocates on this call for solidarity between human right to water and water for nature advocates. We face common threats and common solutions. So thank you all for this amazing discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. And thank you for connecting the dots, or the drops, if you will, amongst some of that work. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Next, we have Marina Perez. Ms. Perez.
Yes, hi. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Chair Escobello, members of the board, fellow colleagues, and members of the public. My name is Marina Perez, and I will be sharing my time with Itzel Vasquez Rodriguez. We are both State Water Board employees from the Office of Public Participation, and we'll be sharing comments on behalf of a larger group. First, I'd like to thank and congratulate the Racial Equity Steering Committee and Work Group. You listened to the feedback, you heard our lived experiences, and you developed a draft racial equity resolution that is both bold and direct. Thank you. Racial equity is infused in every element of our daily work in the Office of Public Participation, from developing informational materials and coordinating equitable outreach and public participation processes that are inclusive of all Californians, and making sure that we meet community where they're at. For us, this is more than just a job. It is part of who we are. It is 24/7. We can't change the color of our skin, nor would we want to. And we can't turn off a switch at the end of the day. So this is something that is very personal to us because it is about us. Some of us come from disadvantaged and marginalized communities and share very similar lived experiences as the public that we serve. This draft resolution is a response to the expressed desire for much needed change and is way long overdue. The fact that the Water Board acknowledges that its programs were established over a structural framework that perpetuated inequities based on race, and acknowledges the role of racism has played in inequities in affordability and access to clean and safe drinking water is a tremendous step forward. However, the hard work is yet to come. For generations, people of color and their allies have worked tirelessly to bring issues of racial inequities and the disproportionate impacts of pollution to the forefront. Testimonials regarding the health impacts of contaminated drinking water, the effects of their children and their unborn children, the lack of affordable, safe drinking water, the unexplained health conditions, and so many more. Voices often not heard, promises that were broken, all resulting in very little trust in government. This resolution acknowledges that government agencies have historically used race to establish structures and systems that continue to deliver desperate outcomes, including wealth, health, and environmental inequities. Systems like historical redlining of communities, which played an integral role in the creation of our current environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, where the top 10% of least polluted communities are 72% white, where the top 10% most polluted communities are 80% people of color. It's pretty significant. Communities have known about these issues and have voiced their concerns at meetings for many, many years, only to walk away disheartened and not heard, but not defeated. We as a government agency have not always fully listened or taken the appropriate steps to address these complex problems, be it due to a lack of resources or staffing, or just not truly understanding how to address these complex issues. This draft racial equity resolution opens the door to a new chapter of possibility for the Waterboards to do the right thing and dismantle these inequitable systems and ways of thinking that have perpetuated these problems for too long. Change can be challenging and it can be difficult, especially when it comes to speaking about race and dealing with communities reeling with generational trauma. However, change is possible. And so now is the time to develop clear, actionable steps and collaborate with communities, partner with communities and local agencies to collaboratively develop solutions, community-informed solutions. I would now like to present a few recommended actionable steps on behalf of a few colleagues from the Office of Public Participation. One clear immediate step is to incorporate environmental justice as a priority to the Waterboard's mission statement and to explicitly include environmental justice as a core value in the work we do. Environmental justice is a responsibility for everyone, not just a select group of people. The Waterboards can demonstrate this value through actions by including the statement in the State Waterboards website, job posting, social media content, and duty statements. Also, it's important to make sure we earmark appropriate funding and resources to address the needs of EJ and disadvantaged communities. This includes providing a larger budget for language services, providing honorariums for community partner representatives to speak at conferences and workshops. These are true specialists. These are community professionals that should be compensated appropriately. This action can help increase trust in government and show the Waterboard's true commitment to providing safe drinking water to disadvantaged communities, and perhaps show communities that their voices are finally being heard. A second clear step is to follow through on this commitment with a racial equity lens in all aspects of our work, from policymaking, contract development, hiring practices, promotion and retention, and budget development. Additionally, regarding the proposed Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, our hope is that this new office is adequately funded with a proper level of decision-making authority, with experienced teams, and with a clear plan. Let's also keep in mind that the impact of racial inequities is significant and runs deep. With humility, openness, and empathy, we can create effective change that benefits all Californians. Muchas gracias, thank you very much. I will now yield my remaining time to Itzel to provide additional actionable steps. Itzel?
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, had to wait for the mute. Thank you, Marina. So as Marina mentioned, she and I are sharing this mic on behalf of a group of Office of Public Participation staff. So I'm going to share just a couple of more actionable items on this resolution. And they're centered on two themes. And the first theme is promotion and recruitment. So we ask that in addition to listing the demographics of employment disparities at the water boards, that the resolution also reference the fact that promotional opportunities are nearly non-existent for staff with language access backgrounds, staff who serve as translators, staff who may have tribal affairs or environmental justice work backgrounds. And this further perpetuates issues with retention. These are staff whose roles traditionally focus on racial equity and who oftentimes they themselves are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. For example, we've had colleagues of color in our office leave this past year to work for other agencies because their skills and backgrounds were not acknowledged or rewarded here at the water boards. And that was a huge loss to the agency and our work. We also recommend that the water boards use non-traditional classifications in order to attract and promote more staff who are Black, Indigenous, people of color with diverse backgrounds. Again, promotional opportunities mainly exist for staff with backgrounds in engineering, in the hard sciences, in geology, etc. And those fields are often very white. And we need to ensure that there are promotional opportunities available to all staff at the water boards, especially staff who work on racial equity. Our agency needs to reflect the communities that we serve, speak the languages that the communities speak, and have people that look like the communities that we serve and that come from the communities that we serve in order to make our agency more effective in our work. And then the last couple of actionable items that I want to highlight today are centered around recognition. So we recommend that the resolution start by recognizing the history of colonization, genocide that this country, this state, and this agency were founded on. Only by admitting that dark history can we truly start to heal and open up this conversation and hold ourselves accountable in order to move forward with meaningful action. And to that point, we also want the resolution to recognize the specific harms that the water boards ourselves have caused. So I think we had a couple of commenters earlier touch on permitting practices, water rights, disputes, etc. And we think those should be explicitly mentioned in the resolution as well. And lastly, on this point of recognition, we ask that the training that is mentioned in the resolution that's being developed, that training be made mandatory for all staff, and that training be held in addition to training on tribal affairs and training on engaging with tribes, as they are sovereign nations and should be treated as such. So we want to make that distinction clear. And I believe the first commentator, LaDonna Williams, said it best when she said, you can't just group all the people of color together, right? There are nuances within that. And so we recommend that training, one, be made mandatory and also could lead to future more specific trainings. So again, in closing, these are just some of our comments on behalf of a group of staff, and we are submitting more formal written comments with more details in the coming days. But with that, I thank you for your time and consideration today.
More importantly, thank you both. Really appreciate it, Marina and Itzel here, and for communicating this for a larger group of staff. I really, really do appreciate the good engagement. Thank you. Next, we have Barbara Berrigan-Perea.
Good evening, Chair Escobello and board members, and congratulations to board member Morgan. My name is Barbara Berrigan-Perea with Restore the Delta. We see the racial equity resolution as a beginning of more work to come. My partners from the Delta's environmental justice community and our staff who are members of the environmental justice community are presently at a key AB 617 meeting this evening. So it was decided that I would comment alone for these Delta groups. I want to acknowledge Brittany's comments, which were so powerful, brave, and moving. We want to recognize how racial equity impacts people of color within your staff and commend your work towards addressing these inequities. We also want to commend the staff of the water boards who work with us our youth advocates, who are all part of the Delta's BIPOC community, and our partner social justice EJ groups, all to bring equity into Delta management. Yet there are limits in policies by the water boards and funding inadequacies that do not bring equity to the improvements needed for Delta environmental justice communities and California tribal partners. We see the racial equity resolution as a beginning because the beneficial uses of water and access to public trust resources are also essentially important to tribal and environmental justice communities throughout California and need to be built still into equitable policy. Recreation, fishing, swimming, and access to healthy waterways is an area of needed significant improvement in terms of racial equity. California agriculture, which encompasses a demographic of 85 to 95% white farmers and landowners, is constructed on a water rights system that began its development during the period of genocide of California tribes and that echoed American policies built in the inequities of the Reconstruction era. How do we bring back farming to tribal communities and other communities of color without an equity lens toward the beneficial use of water? These are big picture questions for this board, staff, general government, and interested California water parties. How do we protect fishing communities? How do we bring back public access to California waterways for communities of color in an equitable way? Drinking water, while essential, is just the beginning. Deep ethnographic research on these topics is required. Anti-racism is about addressing inequity in all policies and their implementation. Environmental justice community concerns are about more than drinking water and include overall access to water for all uses. Limiting equity to only drinking water issues is, in essence, another layer of inequity. In-stream flows are an inequity issue. We also want to add that within the document, we're happy to see referencing towards protection of water quality for surface water. And we are happy about many of the climate change items that were mentioned, but we want to note that water quality related to drought, which of course is related to harmful algal blooms, is completely left out of the document. For some of those more technical items, we will be sending in written comments, but we really want to talk about and hope that there is consideration going forward if this is passed, that this is step one. And then step two is, what is the board's policy towards an equity in the beneficial uses of water? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time this evening, Ms. Barragan-Perea, and thank you for your good comments, and I look forward to the more fuller written comments. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Michelana Johnson.
Hi, I'm a graduate. Good evening. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your comments and especially the experiences of people who have been underrepresented in the water board prior to this. And continue to be. I'm a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz in the Environmental Studies Department, and I study water justice as one of my foci. And after reading the resolution, I just had a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share as like possible additions to the document. First of all, I just want to commend the water board first for even drafting this resolution, echoing a lot of the comments that it's amazing to see a state government agency that has been involved in perpetuating environmental justice concerns and disparities in water access actually acknowledge that and take steps towards addressing it. One comment that I wanted to raise was I was wondering if it might be worthwhile also explicitly putting in the language disadvantaged unincorporated communities. Through my research, I have noticed that DUC's disadvantaged unincorporated communities are often under-researched and thus are not and don't often get the legal designation of a disadvantaged community because some of them are at a scale that's less than a census, that the census would measure. So, and I've also, through talking to a number of researchers who are part of like IRWMs and like researchers at Davis, that there's a lot of extra funding and work, especially through household income surveys that have to be carried out in order for a community to apply for this certain like legal designation of a disadvantaged community. So having more and more resources for those communities and having it acknowledged that there's, even within these legal designations, even though there's funding available for them, it's some communities might not fully have the legal knowledge, the human power, and the expertise and the proper labeling, which in and of itself can be problematic to even apply for the funds. So I thought that might be useful for putting in, especially since Senate Bill 88 passed in 2015 actually gives the State Water Board the authority to have some water systems be expanded to these underserved regions. So that was one thing to note. Another area that stood out to me and I thought might be worth explicitly putting in there is would the state, I was wondering if the State Water Resources Control Board would be willing to work with county and city governments to identify exclusionary like general plans, housing plans, development plans, planning codes, and other policies that have racist language in them, that are exclusionary in their wording. The resolution, I thought, did just a great job of referencing and capturing the history of like municipal and county documents that are explicit in their intentions to develop around these regions rather than provide like clean drinking water and the infrastructural support for these communities to have access to clean drinking water. And I think with, again, Senate Bill 88 and other funding sources available for agencies, water agencies to expand, I hope that the State Water Resources Control Board can directly serve that lending hand in identifying which general plans and other municipal plans remain exclusionary, and those can be rewritten. Yeah, I can send these thoughts in via email too. I wrote something up. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate the oral comments and look forward to the written ones as well. And just thank you for taking the time and engaging with us tonight on this. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Next, we have Ben King.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Let me see. Get a video here. Yes, on now. There we go.
Good evening.
Thank you for your time. So, thank you for this opportunity. My background is that my family's been farming in the Sacramento Valley since 1860, but probably more formative was being raised by a single mother in a small town in Colusa. And so when I look at water policy, it's really a structure that's been set up to benefit insiders, politically connected power, people entrenched in power. And the people who suffer most is really people who don't have power, and usually it's people of color, women and children. For me, what's been informative about this process is the work done by Boston University, the Center for Anti-Racist Research, which is really focuses on outcomes. And when you have entrenched systems, which I think we all agree, water policy in California has entrenched systems, those in power actually operate for their benefit, for their political benefit, for their economic benefit, for their control. And the outcome is usually has both a socioeconomic and in this case, a racist outcome. And so, as my experience in being raised in a small town, and of course I can't experience what it's like to be a person of color because I'm not, but my experience is that people do suffer. And as I look at water policy, I look at in Sacramento Valley. The issue of water quality, I think, has racist outcomes. And I look at Robbins, the arsenic problem in Robbins. I look at the arsenic problems in the small water system of Grimes and Princeton. And then more recently in the drought, which is a foreseeable event from climate change. You know, in College City, we have wagons now delivering water, and Arbuckle's, the water system of Arbuckle is at risk. And there's a gigantic, you know, it's a real crisis now in how we provide for the state, but also how do we protect our freshwater aquifers. And so I looked at degradation. The freshwater aquifer actually has racist outcomes. And I would urge you to think about mitigating that and how you address that. And so from a policy point of view, you know, to the extent that you guys can, if sites goes forward and how you engage in sites and water transfers and how that make sure that the policymakers of sites have representation by racial minorities. And then also the voluntary settlements, and when we have our substitution and anything that may affect that, because it's easy to sell. People want the water buyers and down in the Bay Area or to sell in the rest of the state, which is a good policy. They want the fresh water, but what's left is potentially degraded water coming from the well systems. And personally, I feel like the best way to mitigate this is actually do what we did for the cities of Davis and Woodland and have water filtration systems in the west side of the Sacramento Valley and then in the southern part south of the Buttes, because I believe that at the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to fully mitigate degradation of aquifers. But if we can provide fresh water, that upholds our right and human right to fresh water, but also really promotes equity access, and that it just doesn't make any sense why a city in Grimes would not have fresh water, but Los Angeles does from the same Sacramento River. And then secondly, from a housing policy, you know, to the extent that we provide fresh water in these areas where we have a lot of water, abundant water, we're going to provide actually more access potentially for more housing units, but also provide, may protect the equity that a lot of especially Mexican American communities, minority communities have built up in their equity in their houses. So I look at like a city of Williams, if we ever had like an issue of water quality in Williams because of salt water maybe around it, just think about the wealth that's going to impact those communities. So to me, I think there's an opportunity here, especially with the infrastructure, like may come with something like sites, to actually have an infrastructure plan, focus on housing, bring in broadband, maybe put water systems with broadband and buried electrical lines. I know it's very expensive, but I think it'd be a great investment to provide the human right to fresh water for Sacramento Valley, but also protect the equity of housing, especially for the minority communities, but really also provide housing units for the state. So I see this all interrelated, and I appreciate your work here, and thank you for your opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. King. I really appreciate a number of your good points and for your engagement around all this work.
It's my honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Next, we have Natalie Keller.
Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie Keller. I'm with the Local Government Commission. I want to thank you first for this opportunity to comment on the resolution. And I'd like to highlight a few considerations, both for the finalization of the resolution, as well as the start of that action planning process that you mentioned. First, we ask that the resolution identifies the role of the State Water Board in helping tribal communities to reclaim Indigenous sovereignty over their lands and waters. We also recognize that equitable decision-making and action planning can't be done without local support from nonprofit organizations, as well as community leaders, and that assistance needs to be compensated. So we request that allocation of financial resources be made for that kind of participation. We believe that state agencies and departments need to coordinate on this effort for equity and equitable decision-making. So we strongly encourage that cross-agency coordination as well as cross-departmental coordination on the implementation of the resolution in regards to the human right to water, SGMA, SAFER, and all other related water programs and regulations. We have many more specific considerations that we will include in our public comment letter, but I would like to point towards a document called Guiding Principles for Equitable Engagement in Coordinated Planning. This was developed by the Local Government Commission in coordination with 5 community-based nonprofits across the state over a year-long collaborative process. And these principles were finalized in 2020, but they speak to the role of inclusivity, accessibility, shared decision-making in ensuring an equitable and resilient future for all in regards to water and land use decision-making. So we'd be happy to share that link with the clerk to distribute and think it could really speak to the action planning effort. So I just want to close by thanking you all and sharing that LGC would be happy to further discuss these considerations.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. And please do, really do welcome the leadership here of LGC and just thank you for the great work that you've already done in the guidelines there, but in this space generally. Just thank you. Really appreciate the participation. Next, we have Michael Prado.
Chair Escobello, I do believe he is not on the platform.
Okay, thank you. And I should probably look at my scroll here because I know you do flag here for me whether they're not there. So do we have Tutui Montes?
Yes, he is on.
Okay, Mr. Montes. Tutui Montes, are you there?
I've asked him to unmute.
We'll give him a moment more. And then otherwise, next will be Caitlin Kalua.
Okay. We'll go back to Mr. Montez and I will give Caitlin.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Townsend.
All right. Good evening, Chair Escobello, members of the board. My name is Caitlin Kalua. I'm the policy manager for the California Coastkeeper Alliance, which represents local waterkeeper organizations fighting for drinkable, swimmable, fishable waters for all Californians. Quite frankly, I want to begin by thanking you for holding this powerful workshop and for all the work and the direction that you did give staff in this last year. I'm quite humbled, honestly, to be part of this conversation and just want to say thank you. That said, I would like to echo support for recommendations made by previous commenters to recognize and address the specific harms perpetuated by waterboard actions, permits, or quite frankly, inaction. We especially appreciate the directive in the resolution to create a racial equity action plan that, quote, outlines specific actions the State Water Board will take to dismantle systems that perpetuate racial inequities, unquote, with actual outcomes that improve equity, including actually addressing and eradicating chronic water quality pollution faced by California's most vulnerable communities. My comments today center on first, equitable enforcement, 2, community engagement representation, and finally, equitable water rights. Very briefly, as was recognized in the Cali PA enforcement memorandum that was shared publicly in February of 2020, advancing environmental equity and protecting California's most vulnerable residents requires prioritizing state resources and actions in those communities facing the highest pollution burdens and environmental risks. As one explicit recommendation, we encourage staff be directed to advance existing geospatial tools that are held within Cali PA, such as CalEnviroScreen, to target enforcement and inspection activities and to provide perhaps a geospatial map in the annual report to ensure water board enforcement actions are taken in the communities most in need and that foundational clean water laws are enforced. Second, communities that are most disproportionately impacted by water board decisions are often also those that have the most barriers to participating in the regulatory processes and that, quite frankly, have a direct impact on their health. We sincerely appreciate the directive in this resolution to create a racial equity action plan and encourage the State Water Board to explicitly develop a community capacity building program within that initiative to provide impacted communities and sovereign tribal governments with the resources needed to participate. State Water Board staff should also be directed to conduct local outreach and require project proponents to determine the best mitigation projects that are informed by the actual needs of the impacted community. We further encourage the State Water Board to advance its racial equity and environmental justice objectives by requiring regulated entities perhaps to pay an additional permit fee to fund this program and to ultimately ensure direct engagement with local communities and tribal governments. Third, California's water rights system is inherently inequitable, as we previously heard. It leaves most senior water rights acquired through historic and problematic land use policies with unfettered and inequitable access to one of our state's most scarce public resources, that being water. California's water rights system was created during a time when tribal land was seized and tribes were victims of government-sponsored genocide. Government policies further create a system of residential segregation across the United States, including California, that denied families of color the opportunity to obtain mortgages and purchase property in certain locations, and ultimately impacted and prohibited generational wealth. As a seniority system based on first in time, first in right, California's water rights system is at the very core of the systemic racism and inequality. We encourage the State Water Board to advance a more equitable water rights system by elevating not only our community water rights and in-stream beneficial uses, but also for Indigenous water rights. And to recognize that without adequate flow, that this disproportionately impacts families who are looking to our rivers, our streams, for the health of their communities, and as we see during drought, more occurrence of harmful algal blooms. We'd like to see the proper implementation of in-stream flow requirements as required by law, and that in-stream flow recommendations actually result in enforceable in-stream flow requirements. And let's see, finally, that establishing in-stream flow requirements should actually limit diversions in water use for all water rights holders, not only those with the most junior water rights, and to no longer consider most senior water rights as untouchable when precipitation, especially given climate change and the actual conditions of our water system, can't support public trust resources. Finally, I'll close with reiterating the previous requests and during this public comment period that the written comment period be extended. Do appreciate the amount of effort and work undertaken the last year, but it is, given now we're seeing the written language, it would be beneficial to have a little more time to provide more robust recommendations. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kalua. Really appreciate your engagement on this and good recommendations and thought. So thank you. Next, we have Eric Oriana from Community Water Center.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I begin my comments, I just wanted to note that if we could please give Tutui Montes another opportunity to speak. I think he was just having a bit of an issue with his phone, but I think he's ready to give a comment once next prompted. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you.
Appreciate
that.
I
really appreciate that. We'll have Mr. Montes, you should go here then after Eric. And thank you for flagging he was ready again.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Eric Oriana, and I'm a policy advocate with Community Water Center. I want to start off by saying thank you to the State Water Board members and staff for their work on this very important resolution. We also want to support the comments that Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, California Coast Keepers Alliance, and Clean Water Action have provided or will provide later today. As a community-based nonprofit, Community Water Center works alongside communities to educate, organize, and advocate for drinking water solutions as part of, sorry, I lost my place here. Advocate for drinking water solutions. As part of our work, we recognize and seek to raise public visibility and accountability regarding the role that race has played in the lack of clean drinking water provided to communities of color, and how state agencies and entities has historically been complicit in the inequitable distribution of water resources. We commend this resolution because it will implement a racial equity action plan, include a framework for analyzing how decisions and staff recommendations to the board may impact Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and provide water board staff with training on racial equity, racism, implicit bias, and cultural competence. We have hope that these efforts will allow water board staff to make public participation for Latino and other communities of color more accessible and inclusive in the near future. Additionally, we commend this racial equity resolution for identifying the influence that white supremacy has had in government decision-making processes and committing to making racial equity and environmental justice central to the water board's work. Systemic racism, which this resolution condemns, is a significant cause to the water quality and access issues that Latino communities currently disproportionately face in this state. When Latino communities' wells go dry, largely caused by the overdrafting of groundwater by white farmers, and state entities do not protect Latino communities' human right to water, that is systemic racism. When farmers pollute Latino communities' groundwater and regulatory agencies do not hold them accountable, that is systemic racism. We see the adoption of this resolution as a commitment to addressing various Latinos communities' human right to clean and safe drinking water, and we plan to hold board members and staff to that commitment. Furthermore, the State Water Board must establish effective two-way communication channels to communities of color to understand how policies and staff recommendations will impact such communities. To ensure the equitable participation of communities of color and effective communication channels between such communities and the Water Board, we urge this resolution to include a community capacity building program. This would significantly help avoid adverse impacts to communities of color. In addition, we ask that the board work with environmental justice organizations to develop State Water Board metrics to assess its progress on implementing this resolution. We additionally ask that the board develop metrics to assess each regional water board's progress in 1, adopting a racial equity resolution, and 2, to better tangibly understand whether each regional board is making progress to address racial inequities. This second item should happen regardless of whether regional boards adopt their own racial equity resolutions, although we hope that they will and ask that the State Water Board to ensure that happens. Lastly, we ask that the window for accepting comments to this resolution be extended, as there was less than a 3-week period for review and comments. We thank you for your time and consideration and look forward to continuing working with the board and staff members to ensure that we can achieve racial equity in this state. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Oriana, for your continued engagement in all this and good thought here. Much appreciated. And thank you for taking the time this evening. Thank you. Next, we go back to Tutui Montes.
Mr. Montes, I've asked you to unmute, and on your phone, go ahead and hit *6 to unmute it.
Mr. Montes, can you hear us now?
Now he's no longer on the platform.
I think I still see his phone there.
Oh.
Hello, Mr. Montes.
Hello.
No, this is Mr. This is not Mr. Montes. This is Mr. Prado.
Oh, Mr. Prado. Okay, sorry. Apologies, Michael Prado. Mr. Prado, good to have you on then.
Hello?
Yes, you should be. We can hear you now. So thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay. You can provide your comment. Thank you. Yeah, you are. Thank you.
Yes, I'm calling in from Sultana, California, which is in the central San Joaquin Valley. I'm also a member of the Iowa Coalition, serve on the Sultana CSD, provides potable drinking water for the communities of Sultana and Munson. And I strongly support this equity situation here. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate your comments, Mr. Prado. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Crystal Gonzalez.
Hello, sorry. Everyone.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. Crystal Gonzalez, Policy Associate with Clean Water Action. And first and foremost, of course, I want to share my appreciation and thank you all for your effort to address institutional and systemic racism and the acknowledgement of white supremacy and governmental and policy development, as mentioned by previous commentators. When I first read the resolution, I think that was something new for me to see these terms being used, especially by a governmental agency or document. And so again, just want to really acknowledge that, and also thank Brittany for being so candid, and everyone and folks who have shared their experiences through this process. We are in the process of reviewing carefully the resolution and want to provide substantive comments. And so for today, I just have a few kind of general recommendations. So again, the resolution really touched on a lot of great things. But we also, it's also, as folks were mentioning, the action is also what's really important in terms of like the follow-up and really the implementation. And so we did note that that we are concerned that we didn't see a commitment to act with expediency to regulate water contaminants that disproportionately impact communities of color, and to explore ways to address the sometimes decades-long process to do so. In addition, despite adopting beneficial uses for non-tribal subsistence fishing, tribal subsistence fishing, and tribal culture uses, we didn't see a commitment mentioned to ensuring that our waterways are designated as supporting these benefits so that we can honor the impacts on low-income communities of color and ultimately ensure we can, protect our waters and protect communities as well, who rely on, have different uses. And so, like I mentioned, these are just a few, summarized recommendations, and would also like to echo, community water centers comments and Surfrider and Leadership Council for Just Accountability. And we would also like to request extending the comment deadline, as we really want to make sure that we're providing these, our substantial comments and feedback and really engage. And we also look forward to, the transparent, give me a second, this transparent development process and implementation of the action plan moving forward, which, is also, just as critical. And again, thank you so much for all your work. And it is, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you as well, Ms. Gonzalez, for all your great work and continued engagement and feedback around all of our programs and projects here, but particularly this one. I appreciate it. Next, we have Itzel Flores Castillo-Wang.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. My name is Itzel Flores Castillo-Wang, and I'm a community organizer with Promesa Boyle Heights down here in Southern California. I just wanted to say thank you and acknowledge that this is an important step to take. And as many participants already mentioned, this is the first time that I'm seeing a top governmental agency, include terms like white supremacy and, environmental justice. So that's really great to hear. This is actually I recently heard about this, so I would like to highlight as well, like the extension of the comment period. And I know that you all have mentioned that you did do extensive outreach with communities, but seeing as I had not really heard about it until very recently, and together with other organizations that I work here in Southern California who also heard about it recently, I feel that it would be great to have another public forum if possible, or at least extend the comment period to allow more folks to review it. I also wanted to highlight what LaDonna had mentioned before, that, we need to bring the voices of those who are often not at this table and bring those voices to the table. And I am wondering if there is any way of knowing who the outreach has been done to, like the organizations, the communities, so that we can know and really see like where has the most input been at, or where has the outreach been done, and where is there lack of, and who do we need to hear from. So I think that would be really great. This is also like a minor suggestion for language. I did notice that, we still use terms such as chief deputy director, and being respectful of indigenous communities, knowing that chief is a very important word. I feel that, we should be working towards getting rid of those terms. And I think that would be like a really important step as well. I know that somebody else had also mentioned how often, in terms of like folks getting promoted to jobs, they're looking at the engineers, at the doctors, or those with those types of titles. I think that there should be a move towards acknowledging indigenous knowledge as equal to that, because, they have so much knowledge, and that should be as equally seen as, like having a doctorate degree or a master's when it comes to like, playing a role at the table. And then lastly, at least as of right now, I will be submitting other comments once I review the draft some more. I also wanted to highlight the accessibility of it, because I also did have a hard time kind of coming into the Zoom, providing public comment. And that's me. I consider myself pretty tech savvy, and we've had to navigate through Zoom and so many things this year. And I can't imagine other folks who aren't as able, as tech savvy to be able to navigate and be able to make their way onto public comment, or, get interpretation services or anything of the sort. And again, kind of like that brings me back to like accessibility of language. I do see that it's only English and Spanish, but of course we know that we have so many other communities who speak so many different languages. So I wonder how we can make that to them as well and bring their voices here. But again, thank you so much. I do think that this is an important step that you all are taking, and I appreciate you for that. And Brittany as well for sharing those heartbreaking moments that you experienced. And thank you for addressing all of that and bringing that to the table. Thank you.
Thank you incredibly for the good comments. And when it comes to the outreach, again, hearing that we need to continue to do better and can make sure that we get a list of the organizations, at least we were able to, and make sure that we got emails out to and we're pinging, but we need to grow that, knowing that there are a lot of really incredible local, smaller community-based organizations that can be better tapped into directly. And to your point, when it comes to some of what is the current process around getting onto Zoom and getting into queue on public comment, always looking to make sure and improve that, and really feel that our website generally is this place where we're needing to get better so that folks can quickly, more easily access information to workshops and otherwise supporting material. So all around, just really appreciate the great comment and engagement. Okay, next we have Kareem Gongora.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Waterboard, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Kareem Gongora. I am a father of three, and I also serve on the County of San Bernardino Planning Commission, representing San Bernardino, Rialto, Fontana, Colton, and the unincorporated areas of Bloomington, Muscoy, Rosina Ranch, Arrowhead Farms, Little Third, El Rancho Verde, and Devore. One of those communities, Rialto, which is in the Santa Ana Regional Water Area, experienced groundwater contamination through high concentrations of perchlorate being dissolved in an on-site pond, and it took several years to hold those polluters accountable. This community, and specifically, is 74.2% Hispanic, 12.4% Black, and 9.6% white. And so I wanted to begin with that to kind of really give my appreciation of this opportunity to have this conversation and the leadership that is being utilized to move this conversation forward. And so this resolution, I do encourage you all to improve this with a very firm commitment to materializing meaningful outcomes for frontline communities, such as the ones that I represent and live in. For perspective, following the murder of George Floyd, our country faced a necessary and real confrontation with racial inequities, and it was a Black Lives Matter movement and organizers that challenged us to change our lens in the design and planning of our communities, where we learned that our systems are operating how they were intended. There was a study by UC Berkeley Othering and Belonging Institute that highlighted how we are more segregated than we were in 1990, which in large part continues to be a policy choice. From redlining to land use and rezoning, we are seeing Latinos more likely to live near fire hazards, and we saw Black, Indigenous, and people of color who were devastated by COVID-19. So what we learned is that these systems directly impact lives, and if you live in a frontline community, it prematurely takes your life through exposures to carcinogens, particulate matter, and other harmful chemicals and metals. So I live in the Inland Empire, where we are overly impacted by compounded environmental injustices, and this area is incredibly under-resourced and would benefit greatly from a just transition with not just renewable energy, but equity in water and strategic investments into those most impacted by environmental injustices. I do believe this is a positive step, but we will need to see dollars or a budget affixed to ensuring that there are training programs and investments into frontline communities. And we also need to center those BPOC families as they move forward. I do see there is a plan to put together a proposal by January 2022 to establish an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, but I do not see a clear community engagement component. And for reference, AB 617 established a Community Air Protection Program, which is a partnership with environmental justice groups, community, and the South Coast Air Quality Management District, as well as the California Air Resources Board. There are designated communities and plans with incentive funding to achieve a reduction in air pollution. In closing, I would like to lift up one of the commenters, Maria Perez, who requested to prioritize environmental justice in everything, which ultimately would change the culture of policymakers at your agency and within your sphere of influence. At the end of the day, our families just want to breathe clean air and drink safe drinking water. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gongora. And let's continue to have, again, a conversation about how we grow our ability to communicate the work that we're doing here, and really appreciate just your good comment. Thank you. Next, and I believe this is our last commenter, we have Paulette Chafee. And would also note Tutui Montes will try to also see if you're back on the platform with us. So
Paulette Chafee is not on the platform at this time, but
okay.
Tutu is, and I will go ahead and ask him to unmute.
Thank you. Mr. Montes, you should have been invited to unmute. Give you a moment more here. Hopefully you're able to. And then otherwise, we can begin to transition into board member discussion here. Open up to my fellow board colleagues. I think actually, Ms. Sobek, thank you. I think you did want to make a comment. We had heard a few times regarding the regional boards, and do know that this has been discussed with the chairs of all the regional boards, and it was with understanding and blessing with the regional chairs last August that we first really embarked on this. But want to, and I'll let Ms. Sobek actually get into it, but do want to recognize and respect that the regional boards are quasi-independent. They have their own chairs, they have their own board members, but it is the common goal here for this to be a water boards effort. This isn't just the state board. This is behind this work, and even the staff that contributed to the resolution and its drafting are regional board members as well. So this is a water boards wide effort. But here we only have purview over this board's voting and taking up, but know that I know there is common support amongst all the chairs for this work, and can foresee some of them taking this up, although know that some boards have already, perhaps regional boards, taken up their own racial resolutions. So I may have covered what you had wanted to, Ms. Sobek, but
you pretty much commented. I really wanted to just emphasize that the regional boards are not sitting back and just passively waiting for the state board to take action, but I think they recognized that you know, it made some sense to sort of get a state board framework, and then they could decide how much of that they wanted to adopt or depart from, and that we really have had a very integrated effort. I think one of our principal presenters today, Rebecca Asami, is from a region that we've had two of the regional executive officers on our steering committee having substantial input. And so, yeah, we have every expectation that the regional boards are going to likely do their own resolutions. They've done a lot of other matters, including, just as an example, Region 4 did I think a full day racial equity kind of workshop for their whole board and staff. So it is not just the state board here. And I did want to just, I mean, it's been an amazing group of staff that have been working on this, but I did want to call out Stefan Kahina from the Division of Drinking Water, and Nefertari Cooley, our director of our communications office, who have been co-chairs of the steering committee, and they've really spent a huge amount of their time, which is appropriate. We've tried to make it clear to all of the leaders and managers in the water boards that this is a priority. It's not other duties as assigned, and that our staff that have been working on this endeavor really need to have the time during their actual real workday to spend on this important work of the boards. And I think that's been reflected in the amount of time that they've all put in, but particularly Nefertiti and Stefan.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sobek. I appreciate the acknowledgement and echo it as well. They have been incredible leaders in this space for us and really appreciate their good work. I want to acknowledge Mr. Oriana, you have your hand up, and yeah, by all means, we'll unmute you. Or you should be invited to unmute here at this moment.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the support
Hello?
and the patience. I'll go ahead and let Tutui Montes speak.
Oh, yes. Okay. Mr. Montes, hello.
Yes. So thank you for bearing with me. I had some things I wanted to say earlier, but that has all changed, you know. I live in a small community here in Visalia, you know, and what I want to say is I've heard everybody's comments and what they've been talking about, and they know what they're talking about, you know, a certain way, and, you know, can express themselves, you know, because they're knowledgeable about something going on. I'm a senior citizen. I'm 67 years old. I live on a $800 a month income, right? And I'm not a survey or, you know, like technical kind of guy. So I have issues even getting on Zoom earlier, you know. My phone's an old phone. It has a small screen. I tap this, I tap that. I end up somewhere else. What I want to mention is that I'm not alone. You know, it made me realize right now how many other seniors like me that ain't technically, you know, can't engage. They can't engage, you know, with things like this, you know, because I do not have a computer in my home. I don't have a laptop. I don't have internet, just through my phone, you know, and how much those communities are left out. Just that group of people that are left out, you know, because they're at home alone or whatever, you know, they don't have the means. They don't, and it just really like right now slapped me in the face about that, you know. That, you know, I'm almost feeling like, you know, that you know, I don't want to say stupid or dumb or, you know, I just don't have certain knowledge, you know, about how to maneuver through the technical stuff, you know. You know, I almost want to say I'm sorry for ranting about that, you know. But
no, you shouldn't be sorry in the least. It is a big challenge, Mr. Montes.
I just wonder how many other people have that same issue because they're not financially or you know, whatever it is that puts them in a situation like I may be, you know, during this time. And you know, I'm not gonna apologize and say I'm sorry for ranting or bringing that up. You know, I just needed to say that, you know, and I support what some of the other people have been talking about in regards, you know, to the inequities and all that, you know. I see it happening in other ways, you know. I'm not gonna say I'm lucky, but the opportunities that I've had, you know, as I've gotten older and engaging with younger people that help me, you know, to stay active and continue being active in the community and wanting to serve my community, you know, and that's why I'm here today, to do that. But it just brought it to the forefront is how many there are out there like me that have this kind of difficulty. And thank you for listening to me, and thank you all for the comments that you've been mentioning, during this workshop. And so, thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Montez. Thank you for sticking with us. And I apologize for the challenges and difficulty. It's something that we've been grappling with ultimately when it comes to us moving to these digital platforms, which have allowed for some greater access, but still really a lot of challenging access for folks that don't have computers, to your point, or otherwise are limited. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate your honest frustration around that, and for sticking with us here and providing your comments around this really critical resolution, which dovetails with these challenges of access, which are also critically tied to inequality and needing to see equity when it comes to the services and resources that our communities can have to engage in digital platforms, to be able to participate in this decision making. So just thank you for sticking with us and knowing that there are sure, I imagine, a number of folks that aren't here on the platform with us because of similar challenges. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams. Thank you as well for continuing to stick with us in today's discussion. Did you have something further? Yes.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to, can you hear me? Because I don't see my screen lighting up. I just wanted to recognize, first of all, the gentleman that just spoke. That is exactly what I was talking about. And there were some others that mentioned that outreach didn't come to them. During these times, it's just hard to get it all out because your brain just gets so full, and the passion that we have in this, it's hard to remember everything. But my comment was, I didn't even get an invite to these listening sessions. It was forwarded to me, thank goodness, by Jay Davis with the San Francisco Estuary, who we've done some fish work on. So my frustration was that I was at the table with you all. I helped organize the environmental justice component a year or so ago to be sure that we were inclusive, not only wanting to be complainers, we want to be part of the solution. But what you have to recognize, and I do get it, I know it had to be difficult, but for those of you that don't understand, it's very important that community gets recognized for its efforts. We were the ones that came to the board and said, hey, now, and it's hard to figure out the Waterboards, the separate entities of, who is region 1 through 100 and state and all, it's really difficult to understand how that plays out. However, what I do know is EJ Voices was at the table. We recommended and put forward that the Water Board needed to follow what the Air District had did in doing a resolution addressing anti-racism. We put that forward. We also offered that we wanted to be at the table with you all. And what occurred, we thank Mr. Ritchie for helping put this on the table and on folks' radar. But what it ended up being was that you did listening sessions, you took our comments, and then you took a non-community, non-frontline, non-EJ agency, and then work with them to be that voice. And that's how
one
that
moment. Sorry, Ms. Williams. I will just correct. GARE, when we mention GARE, it's to flag that in 2018 we had engaged with them, but it wasn't GARE that engaged in our year-long discussion here, or were the primary sort of folks in that, if that makes sense. So just I wanted to make sure and just differentiate that.
Well, I appreciate that clarity, because the way that it is presented, and it wasn't just here, I've heard it on several platforms where they mention GARE and your involvement with GARE. And I want you to know that many of our frontline EJ communities are not represented by GARE. GARE works more interagency with you guys, and they missed the mark big time. So we just want to be clear that it's important for you guys, as you move forward in this, to understand actual participation, what is environmental justice and equities and all of those good terms that should mean, including those voices that you don't normally include. It is not a listening session. And then at the end of the day, our voices are not at the table with you to work out these difficult conversations. We should have been invited in that process that you kept within agency more so. And so that document, well, good attempt with the resolution. We really appreciate that. But the end result was you missed a lot of information and good things that could have been added had you did more outreach to impacted communities. And then let me also say this, I think it would be good for you to go over, and I appreciate what you do as well, but it would be good for you to go over your initial comment to me when I put forward the fact that there wasn't this outreach that should have taken place. You sort of dismissed me when you said, well, we did these listening sessions and we held them all around. And it's like, but you didn't make that comment when other folks, brought forth their comments. So I would just say, you got to check how you interact with those of us that are Black, because we're quick to be dismissed. And in the end, as you see from these comments, our comments and our issues and experiences are validated by others that are going through this as well. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you as well, Ms. Williams, for the honest engagement around that. And know that, my comment may have come off as defensive and or dismissive, and no, that wasn't the case. It was to simply be able to talk about the listening sessions that we had conducted. I know that there was a document that synthesized what we heard during those listening sessions. I think it'd be helpful to know, again, making sure where we sort of fell down, if you will, on our follow through, which organizations we reached out to, knowing that, at the Science Data Symposium last year, I was very glad that Greg was working with your group and ensuring that our data science discussion was reflective and had community groups at the table, including yours. And so it means you should have been on our list easily when it came to making sure we notified when the public listening sessions were happening. So just thank you incredibly. Board members, I'll just start off by saying on the extension of public comment, we should do so. The good thing here, particularly Ms. Williams, your comments, feeling that there are other things that we should be putting into the resolution, other thoughts, let's make sure we extend that so folks that are maybe just understanding that currently is that now is an opportunity for public comment around the draft resolution, that they get that time if they're just understanding that to be the case now, and making sure that we get that right balance here. This is our opportunity to workshop and discuss the resolution, and so it's still open for making sure that we do best, just even moving forward, knowing that it seems that we didn't have as thorough an outreach as we should have with some of the community groups. And so would request that we extend the public comment. I know we were aiming to adopt this, had already kind of planned to try to schedule something in August. That may extend that time when we end up adopting, depending on how long the public comment period is extended. But I think that's something that we can do here and ensure that we make sure we have the feedback that we need to make this successful. I would just say that also here at the top, it's obvious a common theme that I continue to feel in this work is reconciliation. We've all collectively inherited these incredible systems, societal, water systems, and otherwise. And we know that they're imperfect, that they themselves didn't have the benefit from what we hold and have as value now. And certainly our scientific understanding even of the actions that we were taking, let alone, again, what we expect here in the 21st century, as opposed to the 19th or the 20th. And so that action of reconciliation has to be a meaningful one. It has to be intentional. And so it must be data-driven. And so I think that it dovetails with a lot of the priorities of this board and continuing to be more open and transparent, more data-driven, and continue to ensure that we invite everyone into our decision-making process to be the best decision makers we can possibly be. And so it is why it's so imperative that this work continue on, but that we be intentional and we be data-driven. And I think that that's incredibly important when we're faced with reconciling our systems, with figuring out, given the climate crisis we have, but importantly, this racial equity crisis, how we're going to ensure that the 21st century has communities reflective of the values that we all continue to embrace here and say yes, yes to. And so I just, at the top, I guess those are my main takeaways. Let's extend the public comment. We're definitely reconciling a system, and it'll be helpful to continue to see this as a data exercise so that we know where are activities taking place, how is it reflective of the values that we're committing ourselves to, and continuing to be accountable to California and to California communities. Fellow board colleagues, I'll stop, and please invite your good comment and thought and questions here.
I can go. I keep wanting to wait for others to to step up first, so feel free to go. But yeah, I thank you all so much. Just so much thanks going around to all the folks that participated today, first of all, for the comments and presentations, and to the work that went into developing this in terms of the staff work, a lot of work, a lot of time that was really tough, and I think is reflective of that this work is really hard and needed. And to all the folks that participated in the listening sessions and that will be helping us figure out how to do justice to what the goal of this effort and really the core value of this agency is and needs to be. I'll just there's a couple things. I think heard so much today. There's some things that maybe are specific that I heard that I'll follow up with staff, and I'm just looking forward to seeing any written comments from a lot of the specifics that were brought up today. My feeling is that a lot of that is really important, and I would assume is maybe at the specificity of things that could or will or need to be in the more specific action plans and work that come after this resolution. But I think, we're really appreciate the help and input in figuring out how we get this right. I do think just fundamentally right now, what with this whole effort, I feel like on one hand, very impatient and urgent, and feeling like we need real actions and outcomes a lot faster. And we shouldn't have to wait until, a year to develop a resolution, and then a year to develop an action plan, and then a year to develop more plans for the other actions within that action plan. I think there's ways in which that can be slow and frustrating, and there's so much more that we, as somebody said, we've already created some plans. Why don't we try to get those done that are, have real impacts? So I think that's one part of my feeling. And then, my other learning through this process, and I think this really, Ms. Evans, your comments, I think really helped ground me too, is that, this doesn't just, white supremacy doesn't change because we adopt a resolution or we take a certain action. It really is one of these an issue that affects our lives every day. And so as we, I often need to remind myself that we need to put relationship before task. And by that, I mean, really, how are we institutionalizing this work And I think that is the kind of work that Ms. Evans, you were talking, that you've been doing and that the whole work group has been doing, and that all the folks that have been participating in all these processes are doing. It's like that, developing relationships, developing the everyday interactions, and just like slow, hard work. So I guess I would say, I feel like, you know, Chair Escobello, I really appreciate that your vision and leadership with this has been just having this be a real meaningful institutionalized effort. I think that is, you know, and a deliberate one, and really comprehensive in terms of folks that it's building in, or that are driving it. So I guess I come at, these are the two, my two, that doesn't mean I don't still have impatience for like outcomes and progress. And it doesn't mean that I don't feel like we need to not wait until we have another action plan a year from now, or like, you know, so I think just my overall comments here are just that, you know, I think as we move forward, we'll receive and incorporate input on this particular resolution. And then I think just really making sure that we can be moving on all fronts quickly without, and throughout our work on really concrete ways that we can do things now and every day in the work that we do throughout the water boards, without having to wait till we have a formalized final action plan, but also that it's really important, and I think it is really important what we have here, in that there is a way that we are institutionalizing this, and that we are I think an action plan is still important, I guess. I feel like, you know, we need both of these like hard, formal, and ongoing institutionalized efforts, and the everyday and sort of immediate work that we can get done now, and not just work that we get done now, because it's not something that like, boom, it's done. It's more, there's decisions that we make every day that we've been making in our board meetings, that maybe we make in just in hiring decisions, or in what we put in the classifications of positions, or you know, how we pull together listservs and sort of you know, collate across the board's different groups. Like, there's all these things that we're doing every day, and I think what this is, my hope is that what this helps us do is just affirm this value and importance to bring into everything that we do, and create momentum, and not to sort of try to control and pace out work in a way that that feels like we can't do things until it's in an action plan, I guess. So yeah, I think this, I'm just really appreciative of people, of the thought and work that went into this. I think this is, it's a really overwhelming effort and thing to take on so many levels, and there's so much here. It just touches everything that we do on a personal, you know, and institutional level. And so figuring out how to then put that into a resolution and turn that into action and the kind of change that we need it to, I think is really a challenge, and one that, you know, certainly I'm committed to helping be a part of, and just appreciate the work that's, you know, that's gone into this, and that will more importantly have to come to be able to make this effective.
Thank you, board member, and agree with you. We don't need to wait for the action plan to continue to do work. And, you know, we have examples of that, I think, going before even the drafting of the resolution, where we did put in some changes, some meaningful changes when it came to implicit bias training on our interviewers. Our interviewing panels all had to have at least one person. Continue to strengthen those actions, things that we can take, but that we don't have to continue to wait around for an action plan around, even though, you know, the action plan does provide us some structure and commitment, specificity around things a little better. But I hear you, and I appreciate your good comment. Thank you. Other board colleagues?
Sure. So I just want to start by thanking staff for their dedication to this work over the past year. Year plus. You know, it started a while ago. While it was while this past year was difficult for various reasons, you know, staff remained committed to uplifting each other during the difficult times. There were a lot of difficult conversations, many meetings with, you know, personal stories and tears, and staff really supported each other. And we also, I would like to see us find a way to be more inclusive in our outreach to the communities that we serve. We've heard, you know, a lot of comments this evening, and you know, I take those to heart. We want to see us make sure that we're providing everyone the opportunity to be at the table. I also like to see us engage both internally and externally as we're developing the action plan, to make sure that we're getting that valuable feedback, and it can help us inform, you know, a better plan. And so I've taken a lot of notes this evening from the discussion, and that I will follow up on. I also, you know, I'll close just by saying, you know, thank you for everyone for engaging tonight and joining us. And appreciate the great comments and the suggestions to improve, you know, the resolution and to improve our engagement with the communities.
Thank you so much, board member. Thank you.
Well, I too would like to thank everyone for this past year, year and a half of engagement. And I've used it as an opportunity to become more self-aware and to just learn more about how best to implement these goals across, for me as a board member, and across all programs. And so I just want to thank staff for in the development of the resolution, for incorporating some key areas that I'm interested in. And I just thought that I'd call a few of those areas out. And so first of all, board member Firestone, I really appreciate what you're saying about, well, first of all, I think we need to be thoughtful in moving forward. There's some sense that I have about, you know, not moving too quickly, because then we're deciding about what's best, as opposed to really taking the time to listen to communities as to what those plans should look like. But I do have a sense just from two other efforts that we've been involved in, and where I've seen improvement just in just about every action, always thinking about human right to water and climate change. And those are two other important initiatives that we've undertaken that I feel have really made a difference across all programs. And for me as a board member, I'm constantly thinking about, you know, is it the resolution, or was it what led up to the resolutions that have caused me to always be looking at those issues, and not just to check the box. Okay, we're done. We did what minimal work we need to do, but really thinking about what more is possible, even if it's not possible to meet a goal, what can we do to incrementally move in that direction? And so I think we can begin work now without necessarily having to have specific and quantifiable actions. We all can do a better job just really putting this at, it's sort of like 10 commandments. We're looking at human right to water in all cases, racial equity, climate change. And so I just really appreciate that in resolution resolved 10A, we've incorporated all activities of the Water Board, all programs. I think at first it sort of felt like it was more focused on water quality and Division of Financial Assistance. And I appreciate that the language is much more broad now. So thank you for that. And then I also appreciate, I believe it's the whereas clause number 3 that calls out Cal Enviro Screen that does a really good job. I think of looking at the socioeconomic indices as well. And so that's just something that I'd like to just briefly discuss here today. And that is for me, as I've learned about racial equity issues and challenges, I've learned about them in large part because of where I live and where I've worked over the last several decades in the San Joaquin Valley. And so learning about people of color and how they are disproportionately impacted by a number of different decisions, not just ours, but all types of decisions, and also how there can be actions that are taken that have a disproportionate economic impact on people of color and communities of color. And we've seen that play out rather directly through COVID. It's just a really good example about how communities of color are disproportionately impacted across the board. And one of those areas is economically. And so I'm really interested in learning how to best thread the needle. I think that when I talked with staff about this, the concern was not to get too far off track, really stay focused on racial equity and not undertake a whole nother initiative on economic justice. But for me, that's a very important component. And I'd like to learn how we can do a better job across all programs when we adopt a regulation, whether it be water quality, water rights, basin planning, Division of Financial Assistance, be looking at the economic impact as well as these other impacts that we've identified, and just really want to learn what more we can do in that area. And I think that just including the Cal Enviro Screen, which does include indices, including poverty, unemployment, low-income housing, all other economic indices that I think can help us to better thread that needle. And then lastly, just want to recognize that many of the comments that came in today about improved communication and access, of course, and I appreciate what you said, Chair Escobello, that we can do a better job. This is a newer initiative. And so I think we all remain committed to doing a better job on improved communication and outreach. But I would also ask that, bring your ideas to us, because I don't think we want to just assume having an evening meeting automatically is going to improve access. Please let us know what works best for you so that we can be responsive to that. And I absolutely agree with the concern about access to technology. As the oldest member on the board, I am technologically challenged frequently. And I do find that if it's too challenging for me to access something, I just sometimes give up. And so I think that's something that we need to take into account, as well as broadband access and just, areas that don't have, whether it's computer access or the internet speed that allows people to have access. And of course, I'm always thinking about people sitting in parking lots where it's just too darn hot, sitting in a parking lot outside of a Starbucks or a public library in order to access these meetings, and how that's, that's just not good enough. And, how do we bridge that gap? So very much interested in seeing what we can do to improve in those areas. So thank you all for sharing your comments with us this evening, and look forward to next steps.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. And I would note as well, for those that are watching, it may be helpful to just to sign up for our email subscription list. If you go to the Waterboards website on the Racial Equity Initiative page, which there's a link on the front page. There at the bottom, there is an email subscription link. So please do help sign up, but we'll also be actively making sure we pull the email addresses from today's engagement and making sure that we're better with the follow through. Thank you. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, thank you all. This has been a really remarkable evening. And I really appreciate all the comments from so many of you, and the recognition that, we've come a ways here in this past year, and we still admittedly have a long ways to go. I'll be honest, this has been, to me, the most eye-opening and just really humbling experience of my life and my professional career this past year, is confronting truly these racial inequities. And there's really, nothing I take more seriously as a board member, representing here the state of California in our decisions. And so I just, really appreciate all the other board members' comments, in light of how it's changed my point of view and my reference for, the policies and programs that are coming to us. I am now thinking about this on the forefront of my mind: environmental justice, racial equity, human right to water. Those are all present for me. And I think things like the resolution, the Racial Equity Action Plan, all these things will put more structure to our decision making and give us more support. Appreciate the comments about the need for budget, community capacity building. We have staff here essentially volunteering and carving out time from their already overly burdened and busy schedules. And I so appreciate that, that we're finding the time. But they were already really incredibly busy. And so these are, budget issues are not easy. It takes some time and process to work through, but I hear you. Those are valid concerns that you have. And Board Member Firestone, you took the words out of my mouth. I was, in my briefing with staff, that was one of my comments, was just sharing my frustration about the time passing here. And I want to put this into a little bit of context. It's taken a year, or really many years overdue, I would say, to have this resolution in the first place, but a year of active working on it, and a lot of good work has happened. And then when I saw that, perhaps another year to have the action plan together, it, for me, gave me some pause that, we can do better. There are actions that we can take in the interim here. And, two examples that I'll leave with you. And so one, the commenter who shared the concern and about titles that we use in the water board. The chief being the example and its offensiveness to indigenous tribes, I think, and peoples, I think, that's an area where we can look at that and we can evaluate whether that's, to the extent to which that's something that can be revisited. There may be other areas within our organizations that we can address within this coming year while the action plan is being developed, that are frankly just no regrets steps, that regardless of the details of the action plan and really the long-term issues that I think that will help address, will help bring to the forefront. The other point I wanted to make, and something that struck me also when I was reading through the resolution, was its connection to climate change and how we're really building upon these inequities over time here. And I think there's the last couple of years have been a testament to that, where we've seen the catastrophic wildfires impact so many communities, and now this drought that we're dealing with that has come to us, and we're already hearing about communities having been impacted by their water supplies. We talk about human right to water and water quality impacts, and those are all pervasive, and we're compounding that now. Our past historic decisions have brought us to this point. The drought is here. We're dealing with it in real time. I think our Division of Drinking Water, our Division of Financial Assistance, and many others are doing everything they can to help with those communities, as we know who they are, to help address the challenges that we're facing. That's an example of where I don't think we should wait another year to have an action plan. If any of those actions relate to something that we can do better here in the short term. So I'll just be interested in hearing from staff down the road here as we continue this engagement. I completely agree. Let's provide some time and additional space for communities and other stakeholders to provide their comments on this resolution. Let's get it right. It's a first step. It's not going to be perfect, but certainly we can take a little bit more time here, I think, to make sure we do the best we can and make sure we're hearing and listening to as many folks as we possibly can. So I appreciate all the engagement today, and I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you all, my board members here, for just incredible comments and commitment to all of this work. This is all a joint effort by all of our joint leadership. So just thank you. So I heard at least one plus up on extending the public comment period. Just kind of looking to our folks here in the program, if that's okay. And what do we maybe agree to a 2-week extension? Would that be appropriate and helpful? Hopefully that provides a good time here to make sure we get everyone's best product when it comes to their remarks on the draft. But just kind of checking in with you, Executive Director, if folks feel that that's doable and okay, knowing that I think it may delay our adoption a bit, especially if we're going to be responsive and actually intentional in responding to folks. So we just flag that. It may, I imagine,
I
push
think,
that out a little, but I think that's more than fine.
Our hope and our goal had been to bring a resolution to the board, to kind of marry up to the charge from the board a year ago, August. But I think, definitely hearing, sounds like a consensus from the board that we should extend the comment period. And I do think that if that's the case, we'll have to just think through how long it's going to take when we'll come back. Whether it's September or October, because we do want to make sure that we get comments and we look at them and try to incorporate them meaningfully.
And I think we only have one meeting in September to flag for folks. So we kind of, it's why it might get kicked to October if that's the case.
So maybe we should talk it over. Maybe we should talk about having at least a 2-week extension and think through whether we want to just go ahead and make that longer, given that it's summer and it's, people's schedules are all over the place. But maybe we can come up with a new proposal and let everybody who's participating right now know that we would have at least an extra 2 weeks, and maybe more. We'll post a new schedule on and send it out to the lists.
I think that makes sense.
And I guess I'm not exactly sure where that will put us on the adoption schedule. It would mean it would be pushed at least to the end of September. And I did want to just underscore that we had a huge amount of content that some of the drafts of the resolution that we were looking at originally were running to 30 and 40 pages, and so the kind of picking and choosing comments is really, really hard. And so we will want to take a hard look at that and make sure that even if there's some great input that might end up not being in a resolution, but would be in some other documents and saved in the right place to be incorporated in other resource documents. And we've heard loud and clear about not waiting for an action plan to take an action. And I can assure you that we haven't and don't want to put off actually taking actions. And to the extent there are short-term opportunities, we have and will and intend to continue doing that. And so maybe what we will try to do is put together a list of those kinds of, a running list those kind of short-term actions that we would try to take throughout the upcoming year as opportunity presents itself. So, if people have suggestions to that, for that. On the other hand, as you know, the beauty of an action plan is that you take everybody's ideas and you get them prioritized and you, commit to work through them, including the metrics and data that everybody has asked for. But it is not our intent to just sit around and do nothing for the next year until we have an action plan.
Can I ask just a follow up on that? So totally appreciate that. I know, this is, if anything, people are working, like we said, over time, just given that there's so much work that went into this and that continues around these efforts. For when, especially as things get pushed back, is there, so it sounds like when you could bring, for the adoption hearing, maybe part of that presentation context is you could share some of the kind of more short-term things that we are looking at being able to do, and also just how we're going to approach developing the action plan. And you don't have to, that's not something to put in the, I think the resolution is good, but I also feel like in order to actually get to an action plan within the end of the year after that, it'd just be helpful to hear, how our staff, how is the steering committee and work group just thinking about approaching doing that work over the next year, because it seems both a bit overwhelming and yet I think
so
that's sort of when the rubber hits the road, right?
So why don't we come back with a schedule? I don't know if we're going to be able to incorporate all the comments and come up with our short-term action list and come up with the full schedule for developing the action plan before we come to adoption, but we can come back with as much of that as we can, and at least let you know when we will in a relatively short period of time.
Great.
So yeah, we look forward to doing that. We look forward to doing all of those things, and hopefully in person pretty soon as well. Because I do think personal interaction will be an important part of this, because it's nice to be able to do it remotely. It expands our audience, but we've been doing a lot of this not face to face, and with these kinds of conversations, sometimes you really need to be in the same room with people and look them in the eye. So we look forward to being able to do that.
Hear, hear. Thank you both. Any other questions, direction, or comments? And if not, just thank you for everyone for the time this evening and the engagement, and still more. And here again, hearing clearly, we need to continue to do better in our communications. And so just thank you for the honest engagement and continued honest engagement that we'll have to have. This is a workshop we still need to adopt, but certainly in all of this, it is ongoing. These are generational challenges that have been built up over hundreds of years. And we're going to need to move quick. There's a sense of urgency because especially with climate change barreling down on us here, we all have to ensure that we are building communities that are resilient to the climate crisis, but more importantly, erase what are these institutional challenges and blatant racism that exists and that we've all inherited, and need not be defensive around it, but instead embrace what it is we're trying to build. And just thank you everyone for that, and for your patience and for your time this evening. And so we will then see you all in about 2 weeks. This concludes then our 2-day board meeting, and just thank you. Have a good evening. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks again.